Okay, try that. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fantasy Reality. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons and the whole sidekick and just concept, as well as changing monsters and NPCs. Now, there's two sections that one could use for changing, applying levels to these creatures, monsters and NPCs. The various folk that the characters and that the player characters might encounter. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a section for adding classes straight onto monsters. Straight up classes, like say, the example that they give is a werewolf with 4 levels of barbarian. Doesn't exactly give a stat block, but it tells you what you need to know. You start with the creature stat block. Gains all the class features for the level, with some exceptions. It does not gain the starting equipment of that class. Each class level you add, the monster gains 1 hit die of its normal type. In this case, for the werewolf, that's a D8 as opposed to the D12 of a barbarian. I mean, let's face it, you give a werewolf a bunch of D12s, they're already hitting hard enough. And this year, and its proficiency bonus is based on its challenge rating, not its class level, which kind of makes a little bit of sense. I mean, and sometimes like, what's the challenge rating this guy starts off with? Because a werewolf with an extra, about, let's see here, they get D8, so let's see here, that's 4 D8s. Well, that comes out to 16, at least 16. Now, let's see here. About 16, 18 hit points, at least. Then you got a plus 1 for their per hit die. Well, let's see it. Well, depending on our werewolf's constitution modifier, that's the hit die plus constitution modifier and times that as many hit dies as you get. 4 in this case. So this guy is potentially gonna get, let's see, making thrifts. Got a con modifier of 2, so 6 times 4, that's 24 hit points right there. No. Oh, you remember, werewolves immune to any weapon that ain't silver related. Magic still hurts them. Something to think of there. Especially if you, as a sidekick, you decide to grab a hold of the Jackalware, which is kind of fun. Would be kind of fun. It's like, okay, we'll have this guy use a point guy. We'll have the Jackalware as the point guy. Ouch! Okay, these guys have swords. Is one of you guys going to come forward and help me take these guys out? Yes, I know I'm immune to their damage, but it still stings. I mean, let's face it, you get a paper cut, it ain't bleeding, but it still stings. You know. And I don't care how tough you are, you get hit someplace, it's gonna hurt. No. You know? And speaking of the jackal wear, another way to apply levels to these creatures or NPCs is Tasha's Cauldron of Everything's Sidekick page. And I must say, it's kind of cool. Because let's see here, you have the expert. The way I read him kind of reminds me of a rogue with a touch of bard thrown in, you know, because he's very helpful, and his helpful feature is a lot like inspiring leadership. Well, I mean, not inspiring leadership, but like the bardic inspiration feature from the bard. And also, he's a skill monk. The expert is a skill monkey, big game. That's the dog, and that's my aunt's dog who's rattling around. Probably wants to be let out because our neighbor just showed up. Well, let's see here. They gain the expert proficiency saving throw in 1 second. Little lady wanted out. Knowing my luck, she'll probably end up wandering into the room at some point later on, after I let her back in. She might end up stealing the... And if you hear any barking in the background, that is currently her. Barking at the neighbor. Gotta admire her. Well, anyways, our expert starts off with a saving throw of either dexterity, intelligence, or charisma. Kind of useful because dexterity is useful in avoiding fireball damage. Intelligence, of course, those are they don't come up often, but those can be bad, like the dominate spells. You might want to. That would be something you don't want to have to deal with. You also gains proficiency with 5 skills of your choice, so that is something to think of. You know, you might want to grab for an expert. You might want to grab a creature that's already got proficiency in a handful of skills. One thing that kind of comes to mind would be the Tabaxi Minstrel from Tomb of Annihilation. Another possibility is the Changeling from Eberron. Because both of those, they have a handful of skills already that they're proficient with. You know, apply that, you know, so they're now really good skill. Also, if they're a humanoid or they have a simple or martial weapon in their stat blocks, they gain proficiency with all simple weapons. Kind of useful. And they also gain proficiency with light armor. That's kind of good. And they are also proficient with 2 tools of their choice. So that's kind of useful. Say you're trying to make the expert more of a burglar sort of guy. That's kind of useful. Although, of course, I'll explain a little bit more later on. Let's see here. Helpful, always uses a help action as a bonus action. It's always useful. Cutting action, it's able to use dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. So that's useful. Hit somebody and then disengage. Expertise, that doubles the proficiency in 2 skills. So that can make your skill monkey a little bit more skillful. Then at level 15, you get to choose 2 more. Level 4, ability score improvement. Also, you pick one. You can take 1 skill and bump it up by 2, or you can take one of your stats and bump it up by 2, or your 2 stats bump each of them up by 1. And you get this at level 4, 8, 10, 12, 16, and 19. These skills do not go above 20, as indicated here. There's no mentions of them using feats, but if you're the DM, well, you can make that choice whether or not they'd be able to accept the feat. Level 6, coordinated strike. Basically, when it's like adding sneak attack damage, okay? Basically, which is kind of useful. Makes them a little bit more roguey. Evasion, inspiring help. That's kind of useful. That's a bit like adding a bardic inspiration right there. Reliable talent. It basically can't. If it's whenever a psychic makes an ability that includes its whole proficiency bonus, it can treat a D10 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. That can be useful. Sharp mind, you gain a saving throw of your choice. Intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. So you got potentially 2 things you have saving throws in. That you're proficient in. That's kind of cool. Then you have the spellcaster up. They're kind of like a half spellcaster, sort of like the paladin or the ranger or the artificer. Only they get their spells at the first level. Bonus proficiency, of course, for expert and sidekick, they both must be able to speak at least one language. Spellcaster, they gain proficiency saving throw in wisdom, intelligence, or charisma. They also gain proficiency in 2 skills of choice, arcana, history, insight, investigation, medicine, performance, persuasion, and religion. Some of those are kind of useful. They gain proficiency with light armor, which is useful because wizards normally don't get access to armor. Same thing with most sorcerers, for that matter. Because most every other spellcaster class gains proficiency with some kind of armor. And if it's a humanoid, it has a simple or martial weapon and a stat block. It also gains proficiency with all simple weapons. Yeah. And you have spellcasting. Now the question is, what kind of spellcaster are we looking at? You have the mage role. They get wizard spells, and basically they use intelligence as their spellcasting modifier. They're basically the wizard substitute. Then you have the healer. They use both the cleric and druid spell list, and they use wisdom as their spell modifier. Spellcasting ability. So that's kind of useful. Then you have the Prodigy. That's a combination of Bard and Warlock. So, Vicious Mockery and Eldritch Blast. That's kind of cool. You know, they use charisma. And basically they get a bunch of spells. They get a number of spells. Let's see here. Skill improvement at level 4, 8, 12, 16, and 18. That's about standard. Potent cantrips, they can add their spell modifier to the damage it deals with a cantrip. That's at level 6, it's kind of useful. Empowered spells. You basically choose School of Magic, and it can add a spell modifier to the damage roll or healing roll. So basically, if you're a healer, you can add your spell modifier, and hey, you're now more potent at healing up the allies. Kind of good. And then at level 20, focus casting. Taking damage can't break the sidekick's concentration on a spell. Let me tell you something. Wizards don't have that. Clerics don't have that. Bards don't have that. Warlocks might have something similar because they have proficiency with concentrate, with Constitution, saving throws. I think one of them. I know one of the spellcaster does, but every other spellcaster doesn't have this ability. It's kind of cool. Not bad for someone who can only cast 5th level spells, huh? Next up is the Warrior. And let's see here, might be a soldier, town guard, beast, or somebody trained for something trained for combat. They gain proficiency saving throw for strength, dexterity, or constitution. They also get pick 2 skills from the list. This list: acrobatics, animal handling, athletics, intimidation, nature, perception, and survival. They also gain proficiency with all armor, light, medium, and heavy. And if it is humanoid, it has a simple or martial weapon in its stat box. It gains proficiency with shields and all simple and martial weapons. Now, there's one little thing that you might want to know is, like say you take a pixie and you take a sprite. A sprite, it has a sword and a bow. The pixie, which is the same size and is basically the same thing, except for the spells, it has no spells. It has no weapons. Now, rules as written, since the pixie is not a humanoid and doesn't have any weapons in its stat block, rules as written, this kind of says this guy doesn't get any weapons. But the sprite, it gains proficiency with all weapons and armor. Now, let me sit down and think for a sec. Because rules as written, there is an ape and it has the ability to throw rocks, and that's counted as a weapon. Rules as written, this means that an ape could theoretically carry a sword. Now, don't get me wrong, there's indeed chimpanzees who have been taught martial arts, and so, and yes, in real life, they are known to throw rocks and other things. So, yeah, there's some, I can understand that implication. But there's other things. I mean, but well, you could, but then again, we could probably say, okay, maybe we'll say that our fairy, that our pixie, you're the DM. The Dungeon Master makes the choices of, okay, maybe the pixie and certain other creatures can indeed use, that have hands, and are reasonably intelligent and wise, can use weapons. Because, let's face it, skeletons, they have short swords and short bows, so something to think of. Let's see here, what else does our warrior get? Warrior has a choice of a martial role. That's sort of like a fighting style from a fighter, or a paladin, or a ranger, or paladin, or the bard of, one of the bards. They have a choice of a couple of fighting styles. Well, their choice between being an attacker, that's a +2 to the attack rolls, which is kind of good. You want to hit, have a better chance of hitting. It does not increase the damage, which is a bit of a shame. But hey, better chance to hit somebody is always good. And then you have Defender. You can use wherein it uses this reaction to impose disadvantage on the attack roll of a creature within 5 feet of it whose target isn't the sidekick, providing that the sidekick can see the attacker. That can be useful. Like, say, your character has a horse of some sort, draft, riding, war, or maybe all you have is a mule that you're riding. And just to let you know, mules are very useful. They only cost 8 gold. Anybody can afford that. Well, pretty much anybody. And they're very practical, by the way, because they have the ability to carry over 500 pounds of weight. That's loot. That's 500 pounds of loot. That's 500 pounds worth of resources that you need. That's kind of cool. And let's face it, that mule, it might be able to make sure that the fellow attacking you has a harder time hitting you, because they have to roll with disadvantage. Does that mean that it's going to be? Does that mean that's going to always work? You're not going to get hit ever? That's a kind of iffy, If they roll, if luck is with them and they roll 2 nat 20s, you're going to get hit. As your second wind, they can regain hit points equal to a D10 plus their level of this class, so that's kind of useful. A little bit of extra health, And let's see here. Level 3, improved critical. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the champion fighter. A little touch of barbarian thrown in. Let's see here. Ability score improvements at 4, 8, 12, 14, 16, and 19. So that's kind of useful. Extra attack at level 5, at level 6, that's one level after everybody else, with the exception of a few subclasses, like the Blade Singers, Wizard, and one of the Bards get that ability. Let's see here. It increases to 3 times at level 15, that's useful. Of course, if it has the multi-attack, it can use either extra attack or multi-attack, but not both. So basically, if you're a creature that has multi-attack and you can hit multi-attack 3 times, might be better off using multi-attack. And You can even use his multi-attack before level 6. So that kind of good. Which kind of makes me think a little bit about some of these creatures that are coming out. One creature that's in Candlekeep Mysteries that I love to utilize is the Gripply Warrior. I'm probably misspelling that. But it's like kind of reminds me a little bit of it's like a humanoid frog. And not quite, it's not a grung, which reminds me of a poison dart frog, or the bullywog, which is more like a bullfrog. This kind of reminds me more of a spring peeper, really. And one of its abilities is it can use its tongue to grapple somebody, and if it is able to grapple somebody, it can then use its trident to hit them with advantage. And that's part of this multi-attack. Its first attack is to use its tongue to grapple this guy, and its second attack is to hit with a trident with advantage. That's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. And imagine applying all that to an expert who's now basically on par with your player characters. That could be real fun. Level 7, Battle Readiness. You have advantage on initiative rolls. That's kind of useful. Improved defense. Your armor class is increased by 1. If you already, let's say, use your sidekick was a frontline medic from Ravnica, they already have, they come equipped with full plate armor and a shield. So you throw on an extra, that's 21. That's an armor class of 21 right there. And that's without giving this guy a magic boosting shield, an armor AC boosting shield, or an AC boosting armor, or a ring of protection even. Speaking of that stuff, there's no rule that says that these sidekicks can't carry magic items. So, and that even goes for, and also the sidekick classes. Those don't just apply to your buddies, those NPCs and creatures that become your buddies. They could also apply to creatures and NPCs that are the player's enemies. And let's face it, the Dungeon Master's Guide has ways in which you can alter weaponry. How you can build items, like say reskinning a flame tongue sword to fit, say, a spear. That's now a flame tongue spear. And guards, they tend to use spears, so hey, it's a flame tongue spear. And let's say they happen to have a draft horse. Well, theoretically, now the one thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is for the warrior is they don't have right here, they don't exactly have a quote magical attack, because fighters, they don't get a magical attack unless they go through certain subclasses. But even so, the idea is that at certain high levels, another thing for the warrior is indomitable. You can roll a saving throw that fails. It's kind of useful. Well, anyways, you can use the sidekick rules not just on the NPCs and creatures that ally to the player characters. You can apply them to the opposition. And also, as I was stating before about the magic items, you can create a magic item for, say you have a war horse. Or let's say you're a little bit poorer and you've just got a bunch of draft horses. Well, but it's like, at a certain point, that war horse's, the amount of damage a war horse can do does kind of get a little finite. Same thing with a draft horse especially. I mean, they're not. I mean, although a draft horse isn't really a pushover when you think about it. I mean, they do have decent A. Well, the AC could be argued, but let's face it. So, provided you have a decent enough level, decent enough money flow, cash flow, you should be able to equip your mounts with decent armor. I mean, it is mentioned in the player's handbook that there's barding. The caveat for barding on, say, a horse is that it costs 4 times the price it would be for a humanoid. So, like say, splint armor, that's 200 gold. For a humanoid, that's now 800 gold. That being said, supposing you didn't want to spend that much for your horse, and you wanted to be a little bit more thrifty, well, let's see here. Let's see here, there is chainmail. That's only 75 gold. 75 times 3, times 4, that's, well, let's see here, 300 gold. So, well, that's, and you get 16 AC. That's not a bad price. Now, of course, if the creature has, say, a dexterity modifier of 2, then scale mail might be a little bit better. Price-wise, it'll give you the same AC, which is for scale mail is 14 plus dexterity modifier up to 2. So theoretically, you could have 16 AC, provided that you have a dexterity modifier of 2. Or you could go, if you don't have the high enough dexterity, and assuming that your mount has at least 13 strength, you could go with chainmail. But even so, assuming that you're a rich enough party, split armor is 200 gold for a humanoid. Times that by 4, that's 800. Of course, that's assuming that your party is indeed wealthy enough you could afford splint for your mount. If not, well, like I said, either chainmail or scale mail would be okay. And, you'd still have a decent AC. And, let's see here, and it's possible you could find some sort of magic item, I mean, of course, the one thing that kind of annoys me a little bit is for, say, the fact that your warhorse or any sidekick animal doesn't gain a magical ability. But as a dungeon master, you could take a little bit of inspiration from the monk, who at level 6 gains key empowered strikes. Basically, their unarmed strikes count as magical for purposes of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. So that's something to think on. Another thing you could utilize is, let's see here, is the Beastmaster Ranger. And yes, the Beastmaster Ranger gets a lot of flack because it's like, and I'll be honest, the way it's written, it's kind of cringe-inducing. But even so, although luckily Tasha's has to improve quite a bit. Well, anyways, Exceptional training, level 7, underneath the Beastmaster. Its attacks now count as magical for the purposes of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. So, utilizing that sort of ability, you could rule that an animal companion at level 6 or 7 gains a feature that's similar to that. Yeah. Or maybe you decide to give, say, the horse a set of horseshoes that gives them that ability, or likewise give the animal companion some sort of item that lets them overcome that resistance / immunity barrier. Now let's go on a little bit more about sidekicks, because as I've gone through the books I own, and let's put it this way, there's over 300 creatures, monsters, and NPCs that fit the rules for the sidekick. Because sidekick has a rule. The creatures must be of a challenge rating of 1/2 or lower in order for the sidekick rules to be applied to it. And I went through the list and I looked through them, and it's like, cool. Some of these low-level creatures, it's like, as I was mentioned with the Grippling, it's the way it works. It's a little frog creature. You wouldn't think nothing of a frog for the most part. But the fact that this guy can restrain an opponent and then hit them with advantage on the second attack, that's kind of useful. And since the creature's now restrained, guess what? That rogue, well, now, he gonna love Mr. Grippling, because, hey, restrained target, that's, hey, sneak attack, right there, wham. It's official level sneak attack. It gets real funny, Of course, everybody else can also hit Mr. Restrained Target with advantage, too. Your fighters who got that, your fighters, they now, like say a champion fighter, improved critical, either 19 or 20, they now have better odds of hitting that 19 or 20. Of course, I would not fireball. If you're a wizard, do not cast fireball at the Grippling. Just because he has restrained the target, you might burn his tongue. And, well, anyways, one of the things that you might want to think on for picking a role for your sidekick is look at the weapons and armor that they are currently wearing. And another thing I would look at is if they already have existing spells. If the spells that they have are inherent spell casting, like with the Pixie, for instance, or the Sprite, any role, like say with a Pixie, for instance, they have that invisibility ability, as well as polymorph. I haven't been hit by polymorph yet, but I could just imagine, it's like, oh yeah, I'm so tough. Yep, Mr. Big Tough Warrior just got turned into a sheep. Hilarity ensues. Then one would wonder if that sheep has any levels. There is actually a stat block for a sheep, but in one of the adventure books, but then again, let's just say he gets turned into a goat or something along them lines. Well, I wonder if that goat's got any sidekick levels. That way he ain't so useless. Well, I mean, there's a stat block for a goat, for that matter. Still. Anyways, well, the pixie, like I said, it's got its spellcasting abilities. Well, and of course, there's a couple other creatures. Like, say, you have the frontline medic. It's from Ravnica. It has spellcasting ability. And another one is the Barovian Witch from Curse of Strahd. Both of those are 3rd level spellcasters. And it might be tempting to apply the spellcasting class, sidekick class, to them. But rules written, no good. Because this would overwrite their current spellcasting abilities. Now, personally, the only existing spellcasters that I would turn into spellcasting sidekicks would be, say, the Acolyte or the Apprentice Wizard, because both of those are 1st level spellcasters, and maybe you might want to change up the spells a little bit. That being said, your Barovian Witch would make a very decent expert sidekick, you know. And as for our frontline medic, very decent warrior sidekick, you know. Because, well, let's see your first turn. Maybe he takes out an enemy. Next turn, heals the injured wizard who somehow got on the wrong end of a longbow. Yeah, kind of useful right there. And, you know, as he gains up in levels, his proficiency, his spellcasting ability modifier also increases, you know. Same thing with the witch, you know. And personally, I think the witch would make a better better expert than they would warrior, because they're not that great physically. But they're still intelligent. And they got a certain amount of charisma. So I can see those witches doing a lot of scheming. Now, again on this topic, if a creature has heavy armor, you know, medium or heavy armor, or shields, I'm kind of looking more towards a warrior sword. So that's where I would go for that. But if they have simple weapons, I might be more leaning towards either the expert or the spellcaster. You know. I mean, that being said, you can change the weapons and armor that the various creatures have. So, like say the satyr, it comes with a longbow and a short sword. So, well, at the very least, it comes with a short sword. So, theoretically, you could take a satyr and change his weapons to the simple ones, and hey, now you can make this guy an expert, or let's see here. Yeah, right. Let's look actually. Well, let's see here, satyr. Yeah, let's see here. Satyr Comes with a short sword and a short bow. So, if you want to make this guy like an expert or prodigy, you'd have to ditch the short sword. But, let's see here. To make it for a decent prodigy spellcaster. And it would also make for a very decent expert sidekick. I mean, it comes with perception, performance, and stealth. So, and that's kind of useful right there. You know, they're able to sneak around. So, change up a couple of change up a couple of add in a couple more skills, and well, decent skill monkey or a decent spellcaster. Take your pick right there. I mean, you have to look at them, and the more you look at them, it's like, okay, these guys are actually cooler than what are pretty cool. And that CR1 well, maybe it's time to redefine CR1 and see just how much of a challenge these guys can be. Because you can, as I said, you can give them different weapons, you can give them different armor, and all of those changes, and that's without changing their stats. And now, like I said, you might have increased their attack, the damage output, you might have also increased their, you've increased their damage output, you've increased their defensive capabilities. They might be a little bit harder to hit, and they might hit a little bit harder. All of that. And you haven't even given them magic items. Give them magic items, and well, let's just say the players will not be looking at CR creatures the same. CR creatures of 1/2 or lower the same way again. Well, that's it for another episode of Fantasy Reality. See you around.